So if you look at English as a language, you can see that it's really just a whole bunch of languages kind of smashed together to make some kind of cohesive whole that works. So if you actually go back in the history of the language on the English Isles, you can see that it started off as a Proto-Indo-European language and developed into Brittonic, Welsh, Cornish, and some other unnamed languages that died off ages ago, long since extinct. It's hard to say when all this happened, but needless to say, it was a long, long time ago. And then in about 55, 54 BC, Julius Caesar came by, landed on the British Isles, and he didn't really stay, but he kind of showed up with his Latin, said hello, and left. In 43 AD, Romans conquered most of the English Isles, bringing Latin with them. They conquered somewhere up to about the Hadrian's Wall. So everything south of Hadrian's Wall, they were speaking Latin for all of their administrative and all their fancy upper-class shindigs and whatnot. And then in about 410, the Romans left. That was the collapse of the Roman Empire. They all left. And because it was mostly the upper class and the administration that was using Latin, they actually took Latin with them. And the island reverted back to using their Brittonic language and Welsh and Cornish and all those native languages. However, with the Roman withdrawal from the British Isles, they were then unprotected and faced some invasion from the north, from the Scots and the Picts. With that threat, they decided they were going to invite the Saxons, Jutes, and Angles from Europe, from kind of the West Germanic area. They invited them up to the English Isles under the pretense of, settle here in this land. Really, their real reason was protect us from the north. So they offered to let them settle in the east and north. And of course, the Anglo-Saxons kind of said, yeah, sure, we'll come settle on this land, and we'll take the rest of it as well. And they conquered a lot of England, and brought with them, of course, their West Germanic languages. So now you had some of the Brittonic language and the West Germanic language kind of mingling there. During the Anglo-Saxon rule, actually, Latin came back in the form of the church. So in 597, St. Augustine evangelized the kingdom of Kent, and with their conversion to Roman Catholicism, a lot of the education was then done for the people who could afford it in the upper class in Latin, right? So a lot of the upper class people, they were now speaking Latin and this Anglo-Saxon language. That's the way it went for a while. And then in 787, there was an overpopulation in Scandinavia. We're not really sure why. Perhaps there was famine or drought or some other cataclysm up there that meant that they didn't have enough food for everyone. And they did the old Scandinavian tradition of drawing lots to figure out who was going to go, and shipped off the people who couldn't stay. And that was kind of the heyday of Viking exploration. You actually see a lot of this in movies, of course. That's the Vikings. They all go looking for land to settle, and a lot of them actually ended up in England. So when they came over, they kind of conquered and attacked a lot of the English coast and settled in there, bringing with them North Germanic language. Now, North Germanic and West Germanic, two different languages, related but different. And then in 866, Ivar the Boneless, a Scandinavian, conquered most of England, bringing North Germanic to the front of the languages that were used. And the English Isles were actually under Danish rule, and Danes and Scandinavians all came over, right? So it was actually under Danish rule for a good long while, actually, I think, 25 years or something like that. And then the Normans came up from France, and they kicked the Danes off the throne. They took over, bringing with them, of course, French. And so now, of course, with the Norman rule, all the upper class were speaking French. The lower class were now speaking the North Germanic and West Germanic hybrid Brittonic language. That's the way it actually stayed for quite a long time. And then when the Norman French actually lost their holdings in France, they were forced to rely more on their English holdings. And with that, they kind of amalgamated more into the English culture. They learned the local language, and the locals started speaking more of their French, And the French and the West Germanic and North Germanic, they once again just smash it all together so they can communicate. And that would have actually been kind of the Middle English language. Before that, it was the Old English. Mix in the French, you get the Middle English. And then between the 1400s and 1700s, we're not really sure why, possibly from migration effects from the plague, Black Death, or possibly from a desire to become more independent and draw away from France. The language actually underwent what was called the Great Vowel Shift, where the pronunciation of the language, a lot of the vowels, shifted from further back in the throat to further forward on the palate. So the effects of this were actually something like Chaucer, who was born 200, 300 years before Shakespeare. If you put the two of them in a room together, even though they spoke the same language, they would not understand each other. And that's kind of the way it remained after the 1700s. England went into, of course, its empire mode, and it conquered a pile of other places. Australia sent all of their criminals down there as a penal colony. Canada, America, I think there was even Hong Kong or something like that. It was English for a while. Anyways, English just spread all over the globe through that time, and of course from there you got the differentiation into local dialects. So you've got the southern United States where they've got their own accent. You've got Canadians with their accent. You've got Australians with their accent, and of course along with that came all the slangs and modifications that happen. And that's pretty much where we are today. So that's the crash course on the history of the English language. Hope you enjoyed it.